Welcome back to the latest episode of the CGA Tour Podcast. As always, here I'm your host, Calvin Glen Alexander. And tonight, I'm joined by my dad, Kerry Alexander, talk some Oklahoma State basketball news. We'd already planned out the podcast a couple days ago talking, but there's some recent news this morning with the Oklahoma State basketball program that Mike Boynton, after 7 seasons, no longer with the program. And you know what? The timing worked out well. So, Dad, welcome on.
Great to be here. Big news.
Big news for sure. I do want to say, before we get too much farther, and I think you share the same sentiments, Boynton was an outstanding man of the people and a face for the university, and I'm not excited that he's leaving in any way, shape, or form as far as a person with the program. I'm excited for new opportunities, and sure we're going to get to, who could be head coaches and that type of stuff, but do want to say, Boynton, one, he was so incredibly supportive of the Remember the 10 run. And also, two, he just was a good face of Oklahoma State athletics going through NCAA turmoil and COVID and everything else with the FBI investigations, etc. So give credit where it's due.
Yeah, he was. And he was, you and I have a little bit of access to some of the coaches just because of our charitable activities that we do with Remember the 10 Run. He was that way away from the mic too. He was kind and thoughtful. We both were in rooms with him with the families of the 10, and he would do every year. Oklahoma State does a lot to remember the 10 as a university, and of course the run itself is in April. But one of the things they do is around the date of the crash, the anniversary of the crash, in late January, they have a basketball game that's the Remember the 10 game, and at that game they'll have a pregame meal for the families and a lot of the people and the staff that come back that were devastated by the pain and grief that happened that day back in 2001. And it really is kind of an amazing. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of that group and to be in there with that feeling, because you obviously have the children, spouses, the parents of the men we lost in that room, but you have a larger group that also was affected. The some of the coaches, some of the players, some of the staff, the people that had to break the news to the families and that worked with them in the years to come. There were so many people affected, and Boynton comes in, and obviously Eddie Sutton was great when he did it. Sean Sutton was with OSU a year. So, they're short, it was a year or 2 years, but whatever it was, a short amount of time. And obviously he was tied to it and had a great touch. Travis Ford was fantastic. He came on and did well too. And then Underwood did well the 1 year he was there, but Boynton was just beyond anything I would have ever imagined. He would talk to the families that this is the most important game of the year, and his team played like it. They won the Remember the 10 game, from what I can recall, most years, and some of the years, like this year, that was the first win of the season against a Big 12 team. And so that was a big win, exciting to see. I think it was West Virginia, if I recall correctly. And then a few years back, one of those years that we were frustrated about not going to the big dance, we played at OU, and it was when the OU had one of its all-time players that was there, short guard from Oklahoma that now is with the Atlanta Hawks, but he was just an amazing scorer, and young, of course. But when he played against OSU, that went to overtime, and it was such an exciting game. OSU was down by quite a bit toward the end of the game. And then they came back with a couple miracle plays and ended up winning. And the last second shot by Trae Young was missed, and OSU won. And he really did well. He swept Kansas in either his first or second year as coach. And this was not the year with Cade. He just had so much going on that was impressive. But no fault of his own, there was just a lot of weight on the program due to the NCAA and some of the issues that were part of what Brad Underwood brought in, and were kind of baked into the system.
Yeah, there's a lot that happened during Boynton's tenure. There is a ton of coulda, woulda, shoulda, but then also a lot of awesome things. A number 1 overall pick, getting drafted, like that doesn't happen. That's not a common occurrence. Oklahoma State, the amount of basketball players who are playing right now that are OSU alums playing in NCAA is maybe even with OU now. I forget where Blake Griffin's doing, but I'm sure it's got to be Cade Cunningham or Trae Young, who would you start a franchise with? There's a whole different discussion. But, having a prolific, high-profile number 1 overall pick, it definitely brings a ton of attention to the program. And Boynton, I'm just really going to remember right now, off the top of my head at least, of, that's just unfortunate timing. I mean, this is a guy who had previously only been an assistant coach for 3 years at, under Brad Underwood at Stephen F. Austin. Before then was a graduate assistant at South Carolina, I believe, his alma mater, and had spoke previously to sports management club meetings, other different things around campus at Oklahoma State. But I remember vividly him talking about how that, when he was a grad student, he was sleeping on a couch and a cot, and he was working and grinding it out, and, wife and kids, all of a sudden making it big time and being a head coach at D1 University under 40 is one heck of an achievement in life. But he was not stopping there. There was the attitude, the grind, the mindset. This recruiting class on Oklahoma State's roster right now, as it stands today, was a top 15 class last year coming in. Depending on what poll you go for, highest I saw was 13. And he's gone out there. He keeps Cade on the roster. He has to re-recruit a bunch of guys because of the whole FBI scandal and the fact that basically if they, the whole NCAA allegations, all that type of stuff as well too, that he had to re-recruit those guys, spend time doing that. Then, we went to the Big 12 championship. We saw him play, and heck, he mentioned it even this year. Won't say exactly how or when or why, but he mentioned it this year of, hey, you know what, we basically were screwed in that game because the team we went to play in the championship didn't have to play the day before, and we played Baylor the day before, so a little different. And
we played West Virginia also, which, not West Virginia. Yeah, West Virginia. We played them like 3 times late in the year. So we played with Cade out for a couple games, and Avery Anderson, was there playing well as a freshman. And we had young players for the most part, and Cade coming back from an injury. So we had guys that were tired from just wars playing. And if you remember that West Virginia team, they were stifling on defense, lightning quick on offense, and to beat them a couple times late in the year was impressive, including in the tournament. And Baylor was a beast that year. And we know what they did, later that season. So what we came off of, and Texas kind of got a free pass into the finals because Kansas, which was expected to beat them, had some injuries and maybe I don't know what all it was. They decided not to play that game because of whatever concerns there were. And you just wonder what would happen. That would have been a big event had we been able to play at full strength against a Texas team that was also having to play the day before.
Yeah, I've had a podcast guest on here previously. Need to catch up with him again here soon when his schedule frees up. But Jay Avery has been on, and he's a big OU fan, but he's got family within Oklahoma State, so he's followed Oklahoma State basketball for a while. And he refers to the whole 2017 FBI and NCAA deal as kind of just a true black eye on OSU's program from basically a death sentence for the coach that's there. And this is a guy who's a big OU fan, lives in Purcell or Duncan, and is not an Oklahoma State guy like you and I who's going, oh man, this just killed us. Like we have no chance now because this is our one excuse. This is a guy who's kind of impartial, talking about it that way. And that helps kind of maybe frame the reference here too of, hey, we're not just saying Boynton had bad luck. He had historically bad luck here with everything happening. Now I can always be in the camp of Oklahoma State with the amount of stuff that happens with the coulda, woulda, shouldas, and if we kept Musa Cisse this year, and if we'd only been able to keep Cade one more year, that was never going to happen from the minute he even thought about signing with Oklahoma State. He was gone within a year, and we all knew that. But it's all the, woe is me. It's not the mentality I want to provoke as Oklahoma State alum. But with the Boynton tenure, I think that is kind of the deal. It was going to be so hard for him to dig out of it because it was just going to take time. And it's, all right, 7 years. Well, 7 years ago was 2017 when the FBI scandal started. And this next year is when we'll finally have a full scholarships, be able to go out and be done with all the NCAA sanctions. So this is a 7-year debacle, ordeal, whatever you want to call it, that we're dealing with. And I've heard several different rumors from several different sources within Oklahoma State athletics from the time I entered there to today, saying Bryce Thompson and I think it's Cisse were both 5-star guys coming out of high school. Both were really thinking about coming to Oklahoma State. Loved Boynton. Would have loved to play with Cade. That was the year they could have gone straight play with Cade immediately. And both those guys, Thompson and Cisse, said, hey, we're not going to. We have other D1 offers, Memphis and Kansas, that are high-profile schools, and they don't have a 2020 NCAA ban hanging over their head. I mean, that was what the NCAA come down with. They said, hey, you're not playing 2020 postseason whatsoever. And it ends up Oklahoma State kind of gets that delayed for 2 years because 2020, COVID, and then 2021's the year we have Cade, et cetera. But that was kind of be the deal. And, man, you talk about that. Talk about Boynton having just, one of those sliding door moments. Remember, we've seen that movie, and I reference it like on every podcast with things that happen. But sliding door moments of, hey, if we had just opened the door a little bit faster, a little bit slower, or this had happened, or this had happened, it's all of a sudden, man, maybe we have 3 5-stars on the team. And instead of Bryce ending out this year injured, and it looks like he's got the eligibility to come back one more year. But also just basically instead of that being the tale of one of the guys coming and then the other guy coming of Cisse, but after Cade's gone, it's like, now we're sitting here going, okay, we're kind of holding a bag of nothing instead. And then again, I do appreciate Boynton and kind of sticking with it. He watching his press conference after the NCAA ruling saying down, him and Chad Weiberg standing up there, that's one of the more impactful things that I've ever watched. That made me feel proud to be an Oklahoma State alum and fan, even though it was a time where, crap, this all happened. But Boynton really stuck up and said, this is, I think to quote, the school called it unprecedented in the history of NCAA, basically the sanctions that were handed down for what seems to be $300 to $500 handed out to a player currently on Oklahoma State's roster, or was on Oklahoma State's roster at the time, to go to a certain agency. So it wasn't recruiting violations to a guy not on the team or anything like that. It was something now that the NIL would go, that's what we give guys a week, or if not a day, for some programs.
Yeah, it's kind of astonishing. And the woulda, coulda, shoulda thing, I think we all kind of look at that and wonder. And I know that it's sour grapes. Everybody has this on their teams. But we had 3 guys that were very strong players last year that played in the NCAA. They played in one, decent NCAA teams this year, but elsewhere from Stillwater. And so you put those 3 guys back on the team: Cisse, Caleb Boone, and Avery. And there were others that were moved on as well. But you put that group with the group that we had, and who knows? This team, I think, went 3-10 on games that were decided by 2 possessions, 6 points or less. And some of those were, like the overtime game against OU, where they had a last second shot that I think that may have been the shot that may have made the decision, because after that, we weren't quite the same. You and I were at that game, and we had fantastic seats to watch it and be close. And it looked like at times OU would run away with it, and it looked like at times that we were going to do the same and end up finishing strong. And at the end, we missed a couple free throws by a solid player that easily doesn't. And then we had, a possession that wasn't great. And then they had, last second shot to win in overtime. And we had chances both ways to win. And after that, you could just tell we were kind of worn out, and that seemed to be it. I'm looking at the list of coaches we've had in our history, and a couple of anecdotes about that. Where do you think Boynton resides for a team that the coaching from 1907 to present? Where do you think he resides in terms of tenure as most years at OSU?
Well, I think he's got to be. So the length worries me in saying this, but I think he's got to be higher up there, just because there's not many guys at Oklahoma State. There's Eddie Sutton, who was, how many years? There's everyone in Oklahoma State's program has been there for so long. Once they get there, Ford was what, 10 or something. So maybe he's right behind Ford, because 7 years is 7 years. And also I'm reading a bunch of and trying to figure it out, but was he the head coach for 6 years, but 7 with the program, or 8 years and 7 as a head coach? Does that make sense either?
He was head coach since 2017. So this was his 7th season, and he's tied with Paul Hansen on the list. And ahead of them are only 4 coaches: Henry Iba, that had 36 seasons, Eddie Sutton, that had 16, and then a coach from the 1920s, John, and I'll butcher his name, Malbish is what it looks like it's pronounced as. And then more recently, of course, like you mentioned, Travis Ford. And the latter two had 8 wins. So if he had coached next year, he would have been tied for third in terms of tenure of all OSU coaches. And his winning percentage at 546, Sean Sutton had tremendous recruits and did well in his 2 seasons. He had 574. Underwood did well in his 1 year. And then, of course, Travis Ford, surprisingly, his overall winning percentage was 583. So that bested Boynton by a fair amount. By the way, we may talk about coaches that are out there that could be of interest. I don't think this guy will be, but Travis Ford was released about the same moment that Mike Boynton was by St. Louis. So his tenure is over there. But if you look at the record that he had and the conditions he played under, I really think that the Brad Underwood situation is what set a lot of this stuff off. Some of the things that happened were, related to Brad Underwood and the staff that he brought in, including Mike Boynton. Boynton was not his top assistant. He was, young and I think he's only 40. I mean, he's really young right now. And so you look at Underwood and his staff. The top couple guys from Underwood's staff either went with him or Lamont Evans, which had some of the issues that OSU got in trouble for, that he also got in trouble at other places that he coached. Those guys were more senior to Boynton, and had Underwood stayed for 2 or 3 years, I just kind of wonder what kind of coach Boynton would have been had we been able to have just a normal coaching contract. Because 1 year is the shortest tenure of any coach in OSU history, other than our first coach ever in 1907. Everybody else has had more than 1 year as coach besides Underwood. And so if Underwood stays, Boynton's more seasoned. I think Underwood gets the program solidified and on a better trajectory. And the fact that blew up so incredibly quickly, I think set a lot of this stuff off.
Yeah. Underwood, I remember the signs and everything. I mean, granted, House of Cards and Frank Underwood's long, it seems like a decade ago now. I mean, it's almost, but it's not that long ago, I guess, better way to say it. But there were the whole Frank Underwood kind of cards that were being made for across Oklahoma State University of, hey, this is Underwood team. And remember, you pitched to me a great idea, which I wish we could have ran with, of underdog, Underwood, underdog, kind of doing stuff with that as well, too, and going off with that. But literally, we are, I mean, granted, it's been a good life. So I do want to say we were in Mexico watching the NCAA tournament against Michigan, and we lose, and it's heartbreaking fashion. So, I think we were the 7th seed. They were the 10th in that tournament. And then there's Juwan Evans and other guys on the team. I think Jeffrey Carroll was as well. Some other guys who are still really relevant names in my head. Really good guys who this year's team will see kind of who makes or breaks a naming recognition 8 years down the line. But with that being said, it was, oh my gosh, this is only going up. Like, yeah, this is a crushing defeat. Sucks to lose to Michigan, yada yada. But oh my gosh, it's only going up. And then the next day, Underwood signs. I mean, he's not only gone, he signs with Illinois. I mean, so it's one of those things where, did you have a foot out the door this whole week, this whole month? What was going on? Was this just truly a stepping stone? And granted, now we can also see at Illinois, he's killing it. So, I mean, he's brought that program back to, or just to relevance, depending on what you want to say. So it's one of those where I totally agree. Looking at Oklahoma State, it's like, hey, Underwood, what the heck happened? I mean, Illinois all of a sudden had somebody coming in out of nowhere, buy out of the contract and move on, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a guy who 2 years before Illinois is at Stephen F. Austin, taking him on a deep tourney run, which honestly gives me a little bright spark, hope, and confidence that we can find somebody this year. Makes a deep tournament run or makes kind of a tournament upset here or there, and we could bring in and then all of a sudden elevate. The one thing as we kind of shift talking to that about a little bit is you and I frequently talk about the differences between Oklahoma State being the no matter what, I'm going to be here forever, and the stepping stone type of program when it comes to football. And it's how blessed are we to have Gundy. It's how many other people are yelling, screaming, going, what the heck? You lost to University of South Alabama or USA by this much, and how in the heck? And then all of a sudden you go, well, what if I told you at the end of the year we play in the Big 12 championship game? And what at the end of the year, I also tell you that Ollie Gordon is coming back, and he's now really the face of Oklahoma State athletics, and he's at every single basketball game, including Bedlam, and stuff like that. Then all of a sudden you go, well, Gundy seems great. Awesome. Let's give it a little more time. It's like, well, Gundy's been with the program for 17, 18 years or so now. So I think about that when it comes to basketball. Boynton was going to be that guy who was going to be, okay, you know what? Like, first head coaching opportunity, stick with Oklahoma State, and then let's see where it goes. Maybe 10 years down the line, all of a sudden it's like, hey, you know what? Boynton's had us with a 500 record for several years, doing good, and we're on the up and up. And instead, it just hasn't happened that way it just didn't happen that way for Boynton. I'm saying this if it's present because it's so recent. But yeah, it just didn't happen for Boynton that way. I mean, Oklahoma State had one winning season of more over 500 when Boynton was with the team, I believe. So it's one of those where it's a tough deal overall. Looking at it, and that seems kind of hard to believe too. And yeah, I mean, the other thing here too as well is one tournament appearance is a real bummer, and I should say that's over 500 in the Big 12, over 500 period. Boynton had not one, not two, 3, 4, 4 seasons out of his 7. So more than 50% of the time when Boynton was with Oklahoma State, he got over 500, but only one was over 500 in the Big 12, which is just a tough deal to do. I mean, it's not easy. Not many coaches are pulling that off. So,
well, I mean, the 1 year he had a winning Big 12 record, they finished 5th in the conference, and that was, of course, the Cade year, and it took a lot to kind of pull that off at the end. And I think he'll have a successful career somewhere else, and I think he'll come back and do well. And I mean, we've seen coaches at OSU that, over the past, I guess the coaches since the time I was there. So I was at OSU 82 through 86. And during those years, we had a man named Paul Hansen, who was actually the coach at OCU right after my parents were in school there, after your grandparents were in school there 100 years ago in the 60s. But Paul Hansen was the coach at OSU, and his last year coaching at OSU was 1986, the year I graduated. And after that, we had several, I think, real high quality coaches. And for one reason or the other, they didn't work out long-term with OSU, except for Eddie Sutton, which we got so much out of his coaching career. But we had, right after Paul Hansen in 86, we hired Leonard Hamilton. And those college basketball fans will know that Leonard Hamilton, I mean, he went on to coach Miami for years, and Florida State. He's had multiple Sweet 16 appearances with the teams at Miami and then at Florida State. And he's been coaching. I think he's still coaching at Florida State at this point. He's getting close to retirement age, I'm sure, but he's been there for quite a while. And so, you hang on to a guy like that. And some of the players during his era were really good. And Eddie Sutton benefited from the roster that Leonard Hamilton had when he left kind of unexpectedly after his 4th year. But following that, when Eddie retired, we had Sean Sutton step in for 2 years. Sean had good teams and was doing fantastic, but he had, I think, the stress of the job and some addiction problems that are well documented came on. And then Travis Ford came in, and Ford was so incredibly successful at the start that we OSU fans and the OSU administration were concerned that Kentucky was going to hire him away when they had an opening. And that seems kind of, at this point, seems like unlikely that we thought that way at the time, but we did. Young coach, bringing in good talent. He had a lot of star players back in those days. You get the Marcus Smart, year. I mean, that was 2 years. That was a real strong period for the program. But Travis Ford goes on to St. Louis after he's dismissed after a bunch of average seasons, but he was there for 8 years. And then Brad Underwood obviously is a high quality coach, and he may be at Illinois the rest of his career, or he may float down to Louisville or somewhere else during this off season. Who knows? But we've had good success with the coaches we've hired, but for whatever reason, they haven't been there long term and done well. And if you look at the past, most of your lifetime, at least half your lifetime, we really haven't had those kind of teams that you go, boy, we're the beast that everybody else has to look out for. And I think OSU has, you look at our arena, you look at the fan intensity, the playing environment, we have the chance to get there. But are we competing against schools that are NIL wise football first schools, or are we competing against teams that are able to put the NIL towards both football and towards basketball, or some of them are just pure basketball is what their focus is, like Kansas. And I know they're putting money in the football team is doing a little bit better, but it's still not, really as broken free. So what do we do going forward? What do we do going forward to, number one, find a coach? Who are we looking at there? And with the buyout that's out there, if I understand it correctly, it was an $8 million buyout until April 1st. And then it's $6.7 million after April 1st. And so the fact that we gave up $1.3 million to go ahead and let him go, two and a half weeks away from April 1st. What does that tell you as far as what OSU's thinking is if we did it now instead of then? Is there somebody that we're looking at that we think we have to move fast to get? Is there someone we already have in mind that's going to be announced after an appropriate amount of time? What do you think there?
Well, we brought up Will Wade already. I think right before we started recording, and that's a guy that the buddy Jake has texted me about already. And listen, that guy skirted through NCAA allegations, but he was fired for alleged recruiting violations. So that seems like probably a no-go. I mean, we already had issues with that. Not necessarily trying to get back into those waters at all anytime soon. The next name that the O'Cauley, writer has brought up here, and I'll give him credit here, Ashton Slater, has said is Bryce Drew out of Grand Canyon. He's the Grand Canyon head coach. His brother is Scott Drew, who's Baylor head coach, and 2 NCAA tournament appearances at GCU, and former head coaching since at Valpo and Vandy. Make him a candidate for sure. That's a guy who I go, okay, maybe, but there's not the timing of it. I totally agree with. If the guy is currently about to start his NCAA March Madness kind of bid, you would probably go, okay, well, let's wait. Let's try to keep Boynton. Maybe Boynton kind of knows, and there's some other stuff, and maybe something else happens. Maybe you try to move on. Maybe you try to move before April 1st line for other reasons that I can't even understand. But this kind of leans to me of maybe it's an in-house guy because, Gottlieb or somebody that's really familiar with the program, that's not a huge personality, or at least a huge candidate wise, it's getting some attention. Because if we're fighting for those guys, well, those guys are going to be playing, you would think, at least in March Madness, period. And Selection Sunday's this Sunday. So it's not like we're going to move on him before Sunday anyways. So what's the rush? And then 2, March Madness, we've seen crazy things happen. We've seen 16 seeds upset, everyone. So then all of a sudden you're for sure waiting a little bit because, heck, you hope the coach is able to take his program to new heights, and maybe that ups his asking price and we can get a deal done here kind of behind the scenes before that happens. But I think the timing of it, just to get back to your point, is really odd, because why do something now? Whereas we know NIL-wise, Boynton talked about it. Hey, we did not have the type of funds to make it happen with Oklahoma State to keep players we had on the roster last year to keep them on this year, that we would have liked to do so. And if we could have done, we would have done. We didn't have it. But all of a sudden now we've got $8+ million to pay out Boynton and just be done with it. That seems like a really weird and quick flip of the script. I mean, we're talking like 3 weeks ago, you and I were seeing the Bedlam basketball game where we lost by 2 on a buzzer beater and then started a 6-game slide. But before then, things were kind of trending a little bit upwards. I mean, there's the win at home against BYU, who might make the tournament. I mean, there's other stuff that happens where it's like, hey, this might be a positive spin on the season a little bit. If we could have, if we had beaten OU, okay, that's 13 wins. Beaten UCF, we shot 66 free throws against. That's 14 wins. So all of a sudden it looks like we're painting a little bit better picture here at the end of the day. But instead, 6 straight losses makes it go, maybe we got to fire Boynton the second the season ends, like the day after or day or two after we lose in the Big 12 tournament. I just don't get the immediacy is odd to me, especially when there's that financial factor behind it.
I agree. Bryce Drew brings a smile to my face every time I hear his name for a couple reasons, but do you have any idea what I was doing 25 years ago yesterday?
Yesterday, no. 25 years ago, no.
That was the Ole Miss Valparaiso basketball game that was played in Oklahoma City at the old Marriott. And that was the basketball game that basketball fans may remember, one of the most famous shots of all time. And Ole Miss was, I think I can't remember if it was like a 13 seed. I'm guessing it was like a 13 seed is what Valpo was playing against, the fifth, I guess that makes Ole Miss the fifth seed or something like that. But it was Ole Miss had tons of talent and was expected to go into the tournament and do well. And Valparaiso was one of those teams you didn't know. Homer Drew is the father of Scott and Bryce. And Homer Drew was the coach of that game, obviously. And they drew up a play I think it was down 2 with about 3 seconds left. Very short amount of time. It's worth going to YouTube to find this one if you haven't seen it. But it was a length of the court pass down to the, around the 3-point line on the far end of the court. And a player caught it and pitched it to Bryce Drew. It was a planned play. Passed it off. I think that's how it worked. Passed it off to Bryce Drew. He hit it, and it was the most explosive, exciting end to a basketball game I've ever seen in person. And it's one of the all-time, videos and memories for those of us who were there to see it, because it was just spectacular. Having no rooting entrance at all. But so Bryce Drew, he was at Vanderbilt, coached there for a while, and was let go. And then he's got his gig now at Grand Canyon State University, and apparently they're doing okay. That's the name out there. The ones that intrigue me the most, there are a lot of names that'll come out, but the one that intrigues me the most would be Doug Gottlieb, just because he's been around the program. He's a link back to the Eddie Sutton era. The one name I haven't heard yet being mentioned, and it may not be, and there may be tons of reasons why it never would be based on his previous tenure, but I kind of wonder about Scott Sutton a little bit. I mean, he's a guy that I suspect would come in, and if he's squared away like he appears to be and can come back in and build on what he was doing before, Sean Sutton. I'm really curious what Sean Sutton, would be like as a coach at OSU if given another chance. He was doing extremely well when he was there, but he did have, again, some issues that if he's overcome them, so be it. And I don't know how unlikely that is that OSU might have taken a look at him, and that might be something they'd be thinking about. I think that based on OSU, I don't think it's likely, but you look at the football coach at Texas. I mean, he had some real tough sobriety issues, and he got knocked down for quite a while, and now he's got a team that went to the Final Four in football and is building a program there that's doing well. I mean, there's a history of and even Eddie Sutton. There were issues at Kentucky with a recruiting scandal that he wasn't directly associated with, other than he was the coach when money was sent in I guess Emory Delivery Services envelope that went out to a player. And so he was part of that scandal, and that's why he was available to OSU, is that he'd had problems in Kentucky and was let go there. So, I mean, we've seen people come in and do well like that. And I'd be really curious if Sean Sutton's name emerges, and if it does, if it's one that hasn't, that would probably excite me as much as any name out there would be Sean Sutton.
Yeah, I mean, would be one heck of a good kind of note for Oklahoma State, just because you bring Sean back in a whole different light, more than a decade plus after he'd already been with the program and dealing with some stuff, as you just said. The other names that I just kind of threw a quick couple Google searches as well too, of just possible coaching candidates that are out there, and these guys all may be headed to even greener and brighter pastures than us, for at least for where we look right now, and honestly just to different conferences that have a little bit easier time week in, week out as well. But Dusty May, he's the FAU head coach. He's been he's an Indiana alum, which, if that means anything, but that's maybe one reason why Louisville wouldn't hire him. Other than that, he's 59-11 in the last 2 seasons at FAU, and we've seen FAU just have really good, head coaching candidates and do stuff in the tournament before. So that's a guy here just to kind of throw out as well too. But checking in, it probably seems he's headed for a little bit different program structures, maybe different programs, not to put Oklahoma State in a bad light, but maybe programs where basketball is the number one priority they have at the school and not football. Because right now, I mean, if I wonder how many freshmen or sophomores or even just students on campus at OSU, you go, hey, why'd you come to OSU if they're out of state? And they go, oh, Mike Gundy, football. Yeah, I mean, that's the sport passion. That's the real-time deal on campus. Whereas I want to say when I was a freshman back in 2012, it was definitely football. We had just won the Big 12 championship the year before and just won Bedlam, etc. But with that being said, it was also like, hey, basketball's killing it too. We're doing great in both. Whereas now there's a clear indication where kind of the NIL money and everything else is as well too.
Yeah, we'll see. And I do have this concern about the hot coach that comes with no connections to OSU and how that works out, just based on long history. And I'd love to have a hot coach come in and stay long term and be successful. But you kind of look at OSU sports right now and you say, okay, well, our wrestling coach, who's been obviously with the conference, the Big Ten is so strong that I think we suffer with competition because of the conference, but we have an incredibly strong wrestling program with an OSU alum that was there when I was in school. Same way with a coach that was there when I was in school. I think he was 3 years younger. Gundy was, but again, you've got him with the connection to school. And then of course in baseball, Josh Holliday, I mean, he is a tremendous ambassador. He's got that program rolling. That's probably one of the hottest programs in the country just because of the stadium and the talent that he's continually brings in. Just beat OU on their own field after OU had done real well against a tough South Central Florida team when they played the previous week, beat them 14-5. And most of the runs were when, hit batters kind of later when we had young pitchers coming in. So it was pretty much a stomping there at OU's own field. So I see success that way, but I've also seen the Les Miles comes in and has a couple of good years, not even that good of years, but okay years. But he does beat OU twice with Gundy as the offensive coordinator, and then boom, off to LSU. And then before him, when I was in school, Jimmy Johnson had average years, never beat OU, but was looking up, and then boom, he's off to Miami and then off to the Dallas Cowboys. And in basketball, Leonard Hamilton was there for 4 years, no real connection to OSU. Boom, he's off. So if we get someone from elsewhere, I have a hard time believing that they'll either, like most coaches do, have a tough time, spend 4 or 5 years and not get the contract renewed, or that kind of thing. Or if he does, a little bit above average, there'll be some disappointment and hope, but not much else. And that's not what we want. Or if he does really well, then those blue blood schools with tons of money for basketball will come in and that'll be who they pick. So having someone with a connection, if we can find it, I think would be ideal, as long as he can coach and do the kind of things that these other three coaches we've talked about, Gundy, Holiday, and John Smith have done. And I know I'm missing other coaches that are alums that worked in other programs, but that at least is where I'd like to see us find somebody. And I'm not sure who that would be unless it was Doug Gottlieb, which he's Calvin, you may be the next coach. You could be, you got that podcasting experience, but that's what Doug does now. He has coached a lot of the internet. He's never coached domestically and had been in charge of a program, but he has coached a lot of the traveling teams that have gone on to play in international sports and in some of those events. So he has that background. But then Sean Sutton, having hit someone like him that he's been, I think, at Texas Tech for 4 or 5 years now, has done well there. He's brilliant, as a mind. And again, I don't know if his name will even come up. That's probably just something it's a non-starter. But boy, Sean Sutton would really hit this is interesting meter for me.
I mean, yeah, Sean would be one heck of a great face of the program here as we try to keep guys on the roster too. Looking up and down the roster right now, there's 3 McDonald's All-Americans on the roster. Eric Daly, Brandon Garrison, and then and Justin McBride. And Justin McBride played barely any minutes this year whatsoever. And Eric Daly didn't start the final game of the season against UCF, but Brandon Garrison definitely did, and he's the 6'11" guy. So I really, really hope that there's a guy that comes in no matter what that's able to keep some of these younger guys and really some of these guys, period, on the roster. I mean, rebuilding from scratch would just be a huge death blow to this. I wouldn't even say top heavy conference, because if last year I said, hey, 7 out of the 14 teams in the Big 12 will get into the NCAA tournament, I think that's going crap. It's a down year, and that's half. That's half of the teams of the Big 12. So it's a night in, night out type of deal. I heard Jerome Tang talk on the SVP, the Scott Van Pelt Sports Center, about how happy and excited he is night in, night out to be able to play in this conference. Yeah, I mean, that's the K-State head coach just going, hey, we're fortunate we get to play in here. With that being said, there's a lot of guys on the Oklahoma State roster right now where I go, okay, Jerry Sicklin, he's done. He's a senior. He's used up all his eligibility. And and Mike Marsh as well. I think from everything I understand, he's also out and he's used up all of his eligibility. And from there, it's okay. Bryce Thompson, does he want to come back? Does he want to keep playing college ball? He's dealt with some injuries here and there, and this maybe the last one maybe is it. But then again, he's a Tulsa guy who, heck, if you're going to come back, if you're going to keep playing basketball, why not come back and play at Oklahoma State unless it's a head coaching change they don't like? So there's a lot of other guys. Javon Small he's the highlight of the year. To be honest, he's honoree all Big 12. So no matter who comes in next, I would love for him to have a strong tie to Oklahoma State, and to really, I think that helped keep Oklahoma State guys on the roster still on the roster at the end of the day too, which would help.
You make a good point about that, and kind of the players we'd be able to keep. I mean, I think the best case for OSU is they bring in a coach, whoever it is, that has the charisma and the energy to keep the current talent, and then maybe bring a couple kids that he's close to and build on that. That seems somewhat unrealistic, but that would be the real reach kind of goal if we could have it. The downside of it is that the players that we have that Boynton has brought in from out of state, the Eric Daly, who's was at IMG Academy in Florida. Williams was in Arkansas, so pretty close. That might be one that would stay, but Small has another year left at least, and he was South Bend, Alabama is where he was. So the ones that are out of state start looking elsewhere and maybe transfer, and then the ones that are in-state stars, Bryce has another year left. Garrison looks like a superstar once he gets in the weight room and gets his body built up. But you look at those two, and Connor Dow, a young guy with some talent. You look at those, and like I said, Williams may be persuadable since he's local. Get them to stay, but have them take a look at OU or somewhere that's a competitor nearby or in the conference, because they're familiar with the conference and they want to keep playing where they play in front of their own families, but they're leaving the OSU program because of Boynton leaving. That would be the worst case, is to start completely over with no continuity with those players and the coaches that actually did the recruiting to build those relationships. That would be the worst case scenario, is have that be our situation.
Yeah, and I honestly don't think that's what'll happen, but I also just didn't see last year's roster happening the way it would either. I didn't see us having such big turnover year over year. And maybe that's the new deal. Maybe it's still NIL and this is the new normal, but I really, one, hope it isn't. And two, for me to see Oklahoma State do well. And then for me to think, hey, you know what? We're going to make NCAA tournament runs, really, at this point is what I'd be looking forward to, or Big 12 championship talks and then that type of stuff here. I mean, NCAA tournament discussions of winning, it's like, all right, maybe they push those in the back of the mind here for a little bit farther down the road. But like Tyreek Smith was a junior, Cisse was a junior last year, Woody Newton junior, three of those guys, I go, okay, would have been helpful this year. The Boone twins, who for whatever reason don't show up on this one website, they are. Excuse me, they're just at the top. There was seniors, but they had another year of eligibility. Caleb did, at least, because he was on the team last year, and Keelan had already left. But I mean, there's just John Michael Wright. Like this year, what happened? He was averaging 9.8 points a game last year. I remember when we went to the Tulsa game in Oklahoma City at Paycom Center, where, granted, not a lot of fans in the stands there, but, John Michael Wright was like the guy on the board. He was the guy on the video board who we're all getting excited about. And this year he played like half the minutes they did last year. So there's just some odd deal. His average points per game was only 1 point less. So that's why I'm not mentioning it as much. But there's some odd things here of, okay, what's going on? And Keon Williams, huge bright spot. Brandon Garrison, as you just said, superstar type of guy who, once he fills out a little bit, incredible guy. And I'm sure, give him another year or two, he's going to be just one heck of a beast and be talked about in NBA draft circles. Heck, if he left this year at 6'11", maybe someone's thinking a second round pick on a guy. Who knows at this point? But that's more just completely speculation, and would hope these guys to stick around.
Yeah, and I look at last year's and think about how likely it is for them to stick around. I look at last year's roster and go, boy, if we lost 4 of our top 6 players that had eligibility remaining, 4 of our last 6 under last year's circumstances, and that's with the hope of players coming in, et cetera, with NIL and with a coaching change, I think we're really vulnerable for those 4 really, really good prospects, prospects for the future, but on the current roster, those younger players. And I think, in a dream world, if we keep Garrison and Keller, I'm ecstatic, because I think Smalls, who knows, I'd love to have him because he was the most impactful player on the team, and Keon Williams, love to have him. But if you get Garrison and Keller back, those two were so strong. Keller, when he started playing a lot, he played like a senior and with a lot of toughness and confidence. And I think he will jump from year 1 to year 2. He's a player that'll be a huge target in NIL. And I kind of wonder, when we look at the NIL amounts that it takes to have players out there, if OSU has a $500,000 budget or something like that now, and it takes about $5 to $6 million at least to keep some of the key players around, are we able to keep funneling enough money into football to keep that healthy? Are we able to pay off an $8 million? That would be right there, the whole NIL thing. We could have kept that $8 million, given Boynton 1 more year and push that $8 million into building the roster as strong, retaining current talent and getting new talent, and then giving him 1 more year. And I think you and I both, when we talked about it, I would have guessed, and everybody I heard talk about it, that both commentators and fans all thought Boynton probably would be gone if there wasn't the huge buyout. But with the buyout, he was most likely to get another year, and maybe that's when it would click and away we'd go. And my hope is they've got a plan that they were ready to execute on if the season kind of kept going south, and that they had the funds necessary to keep things flowing. And that's the hope. And if that's true, we'll probably hear some news in the next week. It'll be something to kind of give the fans something to talk about where everybody else is talking about, the schools that make the NCAA or even the NIT tournament. Keep those enthusiasm levels higher and go that direction. So I'm hoping we hear news maybe by middle to the end of next week.
Yeah, same here, because at the end of the day, Thursday, a week from today, we're going to have the first day of wall-to-wall coverage for March Madness, and it'll be one heck of a fun deal, and I'll kind of forget about this going on for a little bit, but would much rather go, okay, cool, like there's these guys on our roster right now who are watching these games going, okay, we know who's leading our program, coming into next year and getting fired up and whatever it is, versus being on the other side of it where it's like, well, I don't know. We'll see who we can get out of the tournament. Oh, they played a couple good games. Kind of like you said, maybe they play a couple good games. They come in, then all of a sudden it's the Brad Underwood of 1 year and done. And then all of a sudden you're hoping the next, several years after that are good with another guy you just didn't see have him take the spot so quickly. So,
well, hey, before we wrap up, can we do a couple minutes on OSU baseball and on a positive team that we have confidence in? Those guys, you look back at the way they perform in tournaments late in the year, it has been exciting. Now, our trip out to watch we were out, moving towards the West Coast and made a pit stop in Tucson a few years back in like 150-degree heat and watched OSU play in that Tucson regional, where we won 1 game, and that was against, I guess Bryce Drew's sister school there at Grand Canyon State University. But over the years, we have shown up well under Josh Holiday. I'm really impressed by him. He was the speaker for the run last year to the Volunteers, and could not have been a nicer guy behind the scenes. He just is a quality act. And you look at the team this year, and the OU game was one that really caught our attention as far as a win where they just throttled OU in their own field. When both teams, that's a midweek game that you really want to win. They did it without Nolan Schubert, who is by far their biggest offensive threat, just an absolute beast of a player that looks like he's 6'5". He's a sophomore now. He was going to play at Michigan before they lost their coach last year. Came to us late. He is just a rock star as far as a player, and he was out, saving him a little bit till the conference season started. But across the board, Carson Benj is a high level major league prospect. He's a sophomore this year. He not only is a phenomenal fielder, he's a tremendous hitter, and he maybe he's going to be the closer this year, but phenomenal. Aiden Miola, another really, really strong player that's been clutch, that hit clutch hits last year, I think against Texas Tech or OU, one of the two, to win a game late and move us forward into the conference championship. Zach Earhart, Pitching's kind of unknown at this point. There are several freshmen. Colin Bergerman is the first baseman, and he was all conference as a DH last year. But Colin Ritchie, some of these guys, really strong talent out there. Avery Ortiz. It may be a special baseball year this year when it looked like, we lost so much talent off that Rock Riggio team last year. I was concerned, and there were 4 or 5 major prospects. We got young players, and it looks like a fun season. So I hope that everything's rocking out at O'Brate, and people are getting fired up about OSU baseball.
Yeah, and if anyone's curious, last one we had was our best one of the season, I want to say, because we beat OU, and we scored 7 runs in the first inning, beat them 14-5, and a weirdly non-Big 12 series. So that means the Big 12 play opens up this weekend in Orlando at UCF. And then come back to Stillwater March 22nd for the first Big 12 game of the season against TCU, which, man, they're one heck of a program. So that'll be a lot of fun to go watch and cover as well.
I think since OU announced they were going to move conferences, we are 2-1 against OU in football. Basketball, I'd have to add it up, but I think last year we won 3 games against them, so we were 3-2 over these 2 years. And the year before, we may have Boynton may have won both games because Boynton was 5 out of 7 against OU entering this season. So we definitely have a winning record against OU in basketball. And then in baseball last year, I believe we played them 6 times and we won 4. And then this was we played 2 non-conference ones this year, one at Norman that we've already won, and then we'll play one at Stillwater. Then we'll play the ones that are official for the conference. I believe it's 5 this year. It may just be 4, but I think it's 5. So we'll have a winning record no matter what happens against OU in the 3 major men's sports. And for me at least, wrestling is something I thoroughly enjoy. Take a lot of pride in most years, and of course we swept them. I don't think they've beaten us, and I don't know how many years. It's been maybe 9-10 years since they've won, and maybe even longer than that. But I know it's been almost 20 years since they've won it in Stillwater. So it's really strong years against OU, and I think that's something to be proud and excited about too. And in baseball, I think will keep rolling that direction.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And final notes here as we close out the Oklahoma State podcast. Just want to throw out a shout out to Mason Rudolph, who signed with the Tennessee Titans in NFL free agency. So Mason, best of luck, and maybe we'll see some go pokes, pistols firing hand signals after some touchdowns in Tennessee, because heck, I think he's got a chance to be a starter. So hats off to him. And Dad, thanks so much for joining here on the latest episode of the CGA Tour OSU podcast.
Great fun, Cal. Thank you.